Right, good afternoon, our future industrial psychologists. My name is Dr. Marissa Brouwers, and I'm currently CYOPSA's past president for 2020-21. We would like to welcome each and every one of you that's joined us here on the webinar platform, and also those that's watching on the live YouTube channel. So this afternoon session for the student webinar, we will be talking about ISO lead, empowered women that we have empowering others. So what we specifically are going to be addressing will be some of the questions that you've sent us, and we will also be looking at ISO lead, leading yourself, leading within the workplace, and also leading within society and within community. And our guest speakers this afternoon, I would love to introduce them. That is, firstly, we have Dr. Sanay Muleku. Dr. Sanay is actually one of our executive committee specifically for the role of marketing and branding in CYOPSA. She's also a principal in Heidrich and Struggles, Johannesburg, as well as a member of Heidrich Consulting. She's a human capital leader. She's also a registered industrial psychologist, and she's got more than 14 years experience within various organizations such as Nedbank, Rand Merchant Bank, and MultiChoice. And her interest lies in diversity and inclusion, as well as leadership assessment for development. Secondly, we've got Ashley Mutene. Ashley has joined us before, and we are very privileged to have her here with us again this afternoon. Ashley is an industrial psychologist, and she's also the founder of a community-focused well-being initiative called Toletsanang Afrik, excuse me. So please check that out, because there's a lot of webinars and interesting conversations that they host at this community-focused wellbeing initiative. Her current role is in management and leadership, also part of academics as well, and she's very interested in career development, career orientation, coaching, and also mentoring. And then last but not least, we've got Nsipu Skusana. Nsipu is an organizational development practitioner, and she's also a registered industrial psychologist. She's currently at Nedbank, and she also worked for Afrox, Liquid Telecom, MAC Consulting, as well as Deloitte Consulting. And she's got a huge passion for youth development, building leadership capabilities, and creating an inclusive organizational culture within every business where she is. So ladies, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, each and every one in their own role, and also taking lead as women within the workplace, and also sharing that knowledge that you have. So thank you so much. Dr. Sanay, I'm going to give over to you, and thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us this afternoon. So you're welcome to share your video, Dr. Sanay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marissa. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join today. It's as someone who's been a member of CYOPSA in various capacities for over the past 14 years. It's really great to see how much the pillar around supporting students and student work has grown. And so it's really an honor to be here today. What I'll really be focusing on is sharing my journey and my leadership experience, and the learnings that I've gathered along the way personally, in terms of my capacity in internal leadership, as well as how I've been able to influence in community. I think there's often a debate regarding, as IO psychologists, if we work within the corporate space or specialist consulting. And so again, I'll share a bit of my story and what I've experienced, regarding the two environments, and really what I've found works and what doesn't work. I think I've been lucky to work in both spaces, and I've enjoyed both environments considerably. I'll then share a little bit around my PhD research, which I did, which was focused really around perceptions held towards African female leaders within financial services, but I think very pertinent and relevant to where women find themselves today, and where we find ourselves in corporate, and to where we are as IO psychologists. And then the last piece, I'll speak a little bit around the CYOPSA 2020-2021 vision, just in alignment with the new leadership team that's come into place and some of the changes that we see. All right, so my journey, I'm a Durbanite originally, and I moved to Joburg to study, and I went to Wits, which is where I did my undergraduate degree. I did a BCom majoring in marketing and psychology, and I think having never lived outside of home before moving to Joburg, I mean, it was an amazing experience. Being somebody who's extremely performance driven and really wanting to excel. When I did my BCom, tried to do a triple major. So I had marketing and I had industrial psychology and I had a business development major. One of the things though, that was a tough learning for me is that having completed my degree, on the year in which I was supposed to graduate, I went to varsity to register and I was told, actually, you haven't completed your commerce degree. You can't register for your honors, because although I had done more subjects and modules than what my degree required, I had missed one module, which was a prerequisite for the commerce degree. And you guys being in varsity and coming out of there will know that if there's a prerequisite module, you couldn't do it. And so at that point, I was very disheartened. I mean, I felt I'd worked so hard to get to where I am. I had done additional modules, and I felt quite defeated. And I, at the time, tried to speak to the faculty about finding out if I could do that one module at the same time as my honors, and they weren't very receptive. And feeling a bit defeated, I thought, okay, I'm going to have to do this concurrently. And then I had a chat with my mom, who's a very big pillar and support in my life. And she said, no way, that's not going to happen. She came, spoke to the dean, really fought for me to be able to do it. And the outcome was I ended up being able to do my honors degree full-time and do that one module for commercial law part-time. And I think for me, that was like the kind of first learning about real disappointment. I think when I found out I had missed this piece, I felt quite defeated. I thought I'm going to be impacted. My career prospects are going to be impacted. And really, my mother did not allow that. She's a force, a businesswoman in her own right. And what I really learned from her is that if you do the right thing, and although rules and boundaries exist, just push the boundaries. Don't necessarily accept everything that there is for face value, and try to find alternatives. And I think I've always taken that learning with me in my life to say, within set parameters and boundaries, it's important to challenge the status quo and try to find workable solutions in whatever situation you find yourself in, and to not be defeated and allow yourself to sit in the negative. So completed my honors, and then I completed my master's in industrial psychology. And when I did both my honors and my master's, my focus of my research was around call centers and call center environments. And that's allowed me to do some of my research at MultiChoice. And that's how I ended up getting an internship at MultiChoice. So I started there as an intern, and really my experience at MultiChoice was and has formed who I am as a professional. I think I got such rich grounding in that experience. And the first year was the structured internship, spent a considerable amount of time doing psychometric assessments, running the selection process for the customer care and call center environment, and really just supporting the HR consultants and HR managers. I think my experience at MultiChoice was rich because I literally put up my hand for everything. I was willing to be in every project, get involved in everything. The job spec was just a guide. I really just did everything that was possible. And the environment allowed for it. The environment allowed that if you volunteered or went the extra mile, you could get that exposure. And so I really learned a lot in that experience. I then went on to spend a further 4 years at MultiChoice in various roles. And I think in the beginning of my career, I dabbled between this: do I want to be a specialist or do I want to be a generalist or an HR business partner? And I spent time in both pillars. I spent time as a talent management specialist, doing work around succession planning, defining talent management practices, around org structures and design. And I spent time managing my own portfolio as a HR generalist and business partner. And what I found was that I enjoyed both sides of this coin. So to consider the points around generalist HR, where you partner the business and you do work around policy, practice, and guidelines, I really enjoyed that. But I was always inherently intrigued by the side of like really understanding people within the workplace, around really getting to the crux and the deep of what motivates individuals, and designing the right context, environment, and practices within the workplace. At that point, I also did a leadership program at Wits Business School. I think doing that leadership program for me, the Management Advancement Program, the MAP, was really the first step or sign at where I really started to see that my career is progressing and I have capability to step into a leadership role. Up until then, it was really self-leadership, and now it was really moving into the space of leading teams and leading others, which at the time was very daunting, but also something that I knew I really wanted. And I found that doing the MAP program, one, gave me confidence in that I saw that the organization was willing to invest in me, but secondly, gave me the tools and capability to be able to step into that role. And so I then left MultiChoice and I joined Nedbank. And when I joined Nedbank, I had decided that I really wanted to broaden my depth of expertise within the organizational development space. So to really work around design, development of leadership and team interventions, to work on culture, to work on change, which wasn't a strong capability at MultiChoice, but Nedbank gave me that position. And I think it was a great opportunity. Stepping into this large organization with a lot of structure, processes, etc., it really gave me an opportunity to see best practice at work, to work on large scale teams, and really to cut my teeth into real organizational development. After a year, I found that I was a little bit antsy. I felt I'd mastered where the OD space was in my business unit, and I wanted something meatier. Ironically, there was a role available within my cluster for a head of HR for wealth management, but I felt I was too junior. I felt I didn't have enough experience, and it would effectively mean that I would be stepping out from my peers and I would be leading them. And so I didn't put my hand up for that role. Instead, I engaged with Group OD to speak around an OD role working across the Nedbank business rather than in the cluster I was in. And when the cluster team found out, they said, "Why did you not speak to us?" And then I entered the selection process into that head of HR for wealth management role that I thought I wasn't worthy of. I went through the selection process and I got appointed into the role. I think that was the first really large scale role that I went into. And I was surprised by the fact that I questioned my own confidence and ability, and it took other people seeing that for me to go forth into that role. But it also reinforced the fact that I have experience, I know what I'm doing. The fact that in a fair process with other individuals, I was selected for that role. It was a very difficult role. I went from being a specialist to managing a team of about 10 people, a business unit of 1,200 employees. But the hardest part wasn't necessarily the scope or scale. The hardest part was rising from within my team to manage my team. So I had to manage my peers. And also I joined an executive team where I was the youngest. I was the only female, and effectively I was the only African female. And so being in my late 20s and being in an executive team with people who are 45 and above and having to step up into that leadership role. It was really daunting, but I had good support around me. I really leveraged my HR executive at the time to support me, my manager, and be a sounding board. I think often we have insecurities and we are not necessarily comfortable sharing them. And in sharing the insecurities and engaging with her, I was able to get guidance and support. And it was the first time I'd managed a team that large. I think the team I managed at MultiChoice was about 3 people. This was a larger team, split nationally in various locations. And so stepping into that leadership role, I had to own the fact that I'm going to show up as a leader in how I lead. If anybody who knows you will tell you, I'm a very open person. I'm very bubbly, energetic. And so I approach leadership in that way. And I balance the need for what the culture and environment is versus my own leadership style. And I wasn't going to be daunted by the fact that I was young and energetic in a more established leadership team. Instead, I tried to find ways in which that could be my strength. I also had to acknowledge that a lot of the people who I was leading had been in the business much longer than me. I mean, I was in my late 20s and I was managing people who were much older than me. And so a part of my lessons there as well was a bit of humility and to acknowledge that there's a certain capability I bring, but there's a depth and capability that they bring, and to really make sure that I'm balancing this in how I lead the team. While I was at Nedbank, I decided to pursue a passion I've always had. I don't consider myself an academic, but my actions say something else. I've really always wanted to do my PhD. And so when I was at Nedbank, I began my PhD journey. And in the first module, they kind of tell you, like, don't get married, don't have babies, don't change jobs, don't do any of that stuff. And I did all of that stuff while I had registered for my PhD. And so it was a really tough journey. What was supposed to be 4 years ended up taking me about 7 years. I did my PhD at UJ, but it was a considerable learning. It's something that I wanted to do for myself. It was a personal aspiration that I've had, but I also wanted to do the study or the research in a topic where I could really add influence and value, and where I could see from a personal purpose perspective, I would want to add influence. And so I did a study on perceptions held towards African female leaders. And why this topic was important to me is at Nedbank, I spent my time in a client-facing portfolio. And what I realized is that females, and African females specifically, are often in support roles and not client-facing revenue roles. They're often not in roles that create pipelines to become CEO or to be decision makers in the business. And I wanted to understand what's sitting behind this. I wanted to understand the African females who are successful executives, what's made them successful, what in their journey can we replicate and learn, and then also to understand how other people perceive them. So managers, subordinates, what does the environment and system say, and how can we work on that? And so I did my research, and I began it at Nedbank. I moved to R&B and I continued my research. Moving to R&B was amazing. I think when I consider my career, I've been very lucky, and I've worked in really great environments. Like MultiChoice was young, energetic, gave you space. Nedbank was more established, more structured, but I learned from subject matter experts, and I learned best practice. And R&B was really moving into an organization where it's very values and cultures led. It's also an organization with a very strong owner-manager culture, which is like the first Rand philosophy and vision. And it was really empowering to go into a space and business where you are able to own, learn, drive. And so I learned tremendously in that portfolio, but I had to finish my PhD. And so the lesson I learned there was sometimes you have to slow down a little bit, which was very hard for me because stepping into a business unit, wanting to prove myself, wanting to be successful, but also realizing I have to complete my thesis. Otherwise, UJ was saying the relationship has to come to an end. And so I spent a considerable amount of time there focused on completing my PhD. It took a lot of sacrifice. I used to literally go to work, come home from work, make dinner, feed my kid, go to sleep, wake up and like work from 11 p.m. until 2 a.m. It was tough. But I did it because it was something I was passionate about, and it's something that I thought would add value. And it was worthwhile. It was definitely worthwhile. And so I left R&B in the tail end to complete my PhD. And after all of that work, I think I am justified in being able to show my graduation picture in my gown. But I then completed my PhD and I realized I wasn't sure if I wanted to just go back to corporate. I needed to think around where I was. And ironically, I went to a CYOPSA evening around neuro leadership. It was hosted at NetBank, but it was a CYOPSA event. And I spoke to some of the CYOPSA leadership. And what was really interesting is that um, the CYOPSA leadership advised me to say, why don't you consider consulting as opposed to just going back into corporate? Now, sorry guys. Now for me, that was something completely new because I had never thought that I would go into a consulting space before. And so I took a leap and I went into consulting. And I call that my sweet spot because it was something I'd never considered I'd do, but it was something that brought a culmination of all my work experience together. It was my corporate experience, it was my thesis and my PhD because I joined the practice to lead the diversity and inclusion practice. Um, but it also gave me exposure to do stuff like I'm doing today, to be able to speak, to be able to mentor, to be able to coach, work that I'd never thought I'd be able to do before. And so joining Hydric and Struggles for me was really an inflection point. And if I look back on my career and I think, okay, through the three different pillars, what have I learned? From my own personal leadership, disappointments happen. They happen. It's not about what happens, it's about how you deal with it and how you emerge from it. Um, what I learned about myself is that sometimes I don't see my own potential, but other people do. And so it's to be a bit more confident. There's often been times where I've thought that perhaps I'm not ready for a role, I'm not ready for an opportunity, I can't do something, and other people see it in me. And I think it's that inherently to just be more confident and to have faith in my abilities and don't let other people's views or perspectives cloud me. Being a first in many environments, being the youngest person to lead, being the only African female on an exco, having to lead my peers, there were often times where I was the first. And so in those situations, don't be afraid of being the first. Really work on what you want to achieve, what your dreams are, and don't lose sight of what you're trying to achieve, and define a new future for yourself and define a new future for other women around you. Um, I think another thing for me was balancing self-leadership versus leading others. I lead in a certain way. I show up in a certain way, but I had to learn that other people don't. So they show up in their own way. And as a leader, it's to make space for different types of leadership styles, different types of leadership approaches. And so leadership requires a lot of personal agility and a lot of personal reflection. I believe in showing up as your authentic self. We spend a considerable amount of time at work and within the workplace. And so with whether I'm leading in corporate or whether I'm leading in communities or whether I'm leading whatever context it's in, I want to show up as my authentic self. And then show up with a growth mindset, always open for feedback and personal development. Leading in the workplace, when you start your career, hard work pays off. There's no job that's too big or too small. Put your hand up, get involved. The job spec is just the perimeters, really just go in and really lead and take ownership. Also, you may be the first, but make sure you aren't the last. I personally spend a lot of time ensuring that I develop capability within my teams and that I build a team strong enough that if I'm not in a room, they don't need me there. And it's important to build other people in your leadership journey. Challenge the status quo, don't accept things for what they are. Purpose and values-led alignment is important. So make sure whatever environment you're in, there's alignment with your values, beliefs, and purpose. In a corporate leadership perspective, it's not just the what you do that's important, but the how. So you can be an excellent person in terms of delivery, but how you treat people and how you show up as a leader is important. And then women and men are both important in diversity and inclusion. And so it's important that you are contributing and to the development of other women, but don't also forget that the men within the context and environment can help your own development. And often the stories of women who've been successful is they've had men who've coached and developed them, and that's really helped them. And then take a career risk. Don't be limited by fear of the unknown. Leading in communities, my focus has largely been contributing to my close-knit community. I mean, I've volunteered as much as possible within the work context, but I think my contribution has been twofold. The one, I come from a very strong ecosystem of women who support and develop those within their family context and environments. My mother taught me that quite strongly. She's raised and educated many people in our family. And so I found myself in the context of being somebody who develops our wider community, my family, my cousins, etc. And it can be daunting. It can be daunting to be the person who needs to contribute to that space, but step into it and really help those in your personal community drive things. And then the other thing is really around doing good business. Whatever we do in our corporate space and environment has an impact on communities, environments in which we operate and in which we serve. And it's important to always continue to hold that lens. Okay. And then in terms of corporate HR versus consulting, I've told you guys I've spent a considerable amount of time in corporate HR, and now I'm in consulting. What I found to be the differences between the two. As an internal consultant, I really found that there was a lot of support within large scale organizations. There's COEs that are able to help you, formal layers of management, etc. There's performance reviews to continually give you feedback. You've got a formal salary in place, and you are really playing a business partnering role. And the difference with being in the external consulting space, I found, is that it's much smaller. Having worked in large scale organizations to where I am now, it's a team of like 25 people. It's much smaller franchise, but we do work across global teams. But I'm really an entrepreneur. I have to define my own space, get my own clients, generate my own revenue. I work with the C-suite and its senior management. And I'm really expected to be a specialist and bring value, whereas I can't necessarily leverage external forces and capabilities. And I think people approach their careers from different angles. I started in corporate and I've branched into specialization, but many people start in specialization and go into corporate. I think it's really about where you find yourself, and there's definitely merit, depth, exposure, and to both. And I've thoroughly enjoyed being in both spaces. And then the last kind of pieces I'll share with you is, I spoke around my PhD, which was focused around perceptions held towards African female leaders in financial services and how they're perceived, how their perceived influences them, and how they think, or how their peers, managers, and subordinates view them. I think the takeaway that I really wanted to share with you guys from here is that the research really shows that how African female leaders are perceived differs to how successful middle managers are perceived, males are perceived, and females in general are perceived. And really the way in which we can drive change in organizations sits in two kind of spheres. The one is, what can I do as an individual? So when I show up in the workplace, and that's really around self-assessment and ensuring there's continuous feedback loops, coaching and mentoring, and making sure that I focus on my own internal development and invest in the development of others. From an organizational lens perspective, and as IO psychologists, when we show up in the workplace, it's really around creating a context and environment where leaders understand and have a space in which African female leaders have a space to thrive and can engage with others. We understand which African female leaders have a desire to lead. We remove biases and within the environment and context, and really create diversity and inclusion. We ensure that our organizational practices have got that removed, and we do what we're doing today. We share stories of how to make people successful, and to ensure that other people understand other people's journeys and can learn from them. And we constantly get a understanding of employee sentiment and what the environment says. And that we train and develop managers to lead diverse teams. Research shows that the large component of the leadership team is composed of men who have a different lens, different perspectives. And so it's important to ensure that we train people to be able to lead diverse teams. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to leave you with is Marissa indicated at the beginning that I'm part of the CYOPSA executive team, and the new executive team came into place on the 1st of August 2020. And as you guys will know, CYOPSA is really around human behavior specialists in the workplace and how we really drive impact and value. And so Natasha is our new president. This is the new leadership team. And our vision for 2020-2021 is to be a member-based society for work psychology professionals that empower our members to make an impact in society and business. And so those of you who are members, those of you who are thinking of becoming members, we welcome you on board, and it's important that your voice is heard and that you contribute to us as an organization, but also that as an IOP fraternity, we really consider how we impact organizations, how we impact societies, because that's fundamentally what we're driving for. There are 3 pillars to our strategy. We've been in a volatile environment. COVID, prior to that, we already spoke conversations around being in a VUCA environment, understanding the change that technology brings, and really understanding the fact that as an organization and as a practice, we want to ensure that we have a sustainability mindset. So do we have a diversified revenue model? And are we ensuring that we're able to sustain ourselves as a body, but also sustain the IO practice? Second is around voice and visibility. We really want to expand our breadth and impact widely to IOPs and make sure that we have a voice and we are seen, but moving beyond that and really having a voice and being seen within corporate environments and wider than that, and really ensuring that CYOPSA is present across multiple platforms. And then the last is around being diverse and inclusive in how we collaborate and how we add value. We really want to ensure that we promote and support transformation of the IOP profession, and that we are considered as thought leaders in the practice around diversity and inclusion. And so for those of you who are members, there's tremendous benefits and value in being able to leverage a network of individuals, in being able to attend sessions like this. As I mentioned, sessions I've been to have been considerably of value. We have the conference coming up towards the end of the year. And so I really encourage you to consider membership. Our membership cycle has changed, and so the new membership cycle will start on 1 January. Look out for the website, there'll be more information. And so I leave you with, as I conclude, to say, don't be afraid. Be focused, be determined, be hopeful, be empowered. Like that Michelle Obama quote just really resonates with me. Jacinta Ardern I really love, because I love the view that she has that leadership doesn't have to show up in one way. And if you follow her or you know about her, she's really considered to be an empathetic leader. And so we need to create a new generation of leadership and show up in your own authentic way. And then the last one around our Miss South Africa, to really take up space in wherever you are. And that's it for me. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sadei. Very inspirational. And I think it's wonderful that you shared with us your journey so that students and future industrial psychologists also can see where you can start and where you can end up, and how many opportunities there is in this space for them to grow as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. Ashley Mutene, are you ready for us? You are welcome to share your slides.
All right, thanks, Marissa. Indeed, I am. We'll be sharing my screen, so just bear with me for a bit and we'll get going. So I found Sane's session so inspiring, just considering how really a career in industrial psychology is not a straight line, and probably shouldn't be a straight line. I think that is a big part to why a lot of us have been drawn to this type of psychology. So definitely inspiring. And also I hope that for everyone who has joined us as well, that you are seeing how an integrated approach starts to change the game quite a lot. And what goes into that will look so different for each of you. So in essence, the focus that I'll be taking today really is about Basadi at work, women at work, and sharing a bit about my own experience as well, and also leaning into internships. So the earlier parts of a career in industrial psychology, because it can feel quite rocky, having interacted with quite a lot of interns, and even people embarking on master studies, for example, and even friends and people who are looking to change careers during this time. As women, what does it really take? And it is probably quite unfortunate that it is still taking a lot as it relates to women. But on the other hand, as well, it's so exciting to know that there is a lot for us to hope for, and there's a lot for us to draw from our careers, regardless of at which stage of your career you are. So as Marissa has introduced me, I am an industrial psychologist by training, and have loved working in Johannesburg, which is mostly where I am based. Although even in the early days of my career, it took me to different parts of this continent, as well as having clients abroad as well, Dubai being the most exciting, in a sense that some of my clients in that space, the time zone thing, I would find myself having to do some work at night, and things like that, and not always as easy to do, but also learning so much just in terms of what cross-cultural or interdisciplinary approaches and applications of psychology can look like. So in essence, my initial training was in consulting psychology, and has moved more towards a broader community focus view, as well as a bit of academia as well. So I actually won't start with my career insights now, but put that somewhere in the middle of today's presentation. So, I mean, one of the things that I would hope that as you engage with your studies, or even as you consider what exploring a career in HRM and IOP can look like for you, is that there's a narrative that definitely needs to shift. And I love how Sane's PhD has focused so strongly on that, and how she has brought those insights into today's webinars, because I think there definitely is a lot for us to glean on, and a lot that I have experienced. So in my case, I've actually been working since my first year of studies. So it's been a very long journey of working in different contexts, but at the same time, I've always been aware of my own positioning, or aware of how much I belong or feel like I don't belong in the world, or even in the world of work. And so it goes, I think, with all of us. We get that sense of wanting to explore further who I am, and what does that really mean for even the type of work that I want to do. But for me, I think a passion igniter is definitely along the lines of what is my role contribution. So today the angle is as a woman in IOP, but generally as a woman in this African continent, what does it really look like? And I think the narratives that are there to shift, it is the work that all of us have cut out for us, if you are wanting a career in this space, of how do you create that space, or how do you take up that space? And especially because we are still hearing things like women are ready to lead, which I find to be such a problematic type of statement, even considering that, over generations, considering that even in my own family, regardless of how formally educated women have been there, but women have always been at work, and have always contributed to the economic well-being of countries, and as well as the vibrancy that we see in our organizations. Yet it still almost feels like, you know, she as a woman is celebrated in one month but underpaid all other months, for example, you know. And it's about gender gap reducing strategies, and salary would definitely be among those things. For example, how you will easily feel, even as you find your feet in the workplace, that you're part of the team, but as soon as you work with certain clients, and whatever has culturally been normalized, even in workspaces and corporate and things like that, you might find yourself sometimes maybe not being listened to as authentically, or maybe not even being allowed to transform workplaces without, you know, your competence being questioned sometimes, whether it is done directly or indirectly. I can think of many examples, even when I was an intern, of a client who would be more keen to speak, for example, to my male colleague and make more eye contact with him in a workshop that we are co-facilitating, and maybe even more switched off when I'm the one now facilitating. And it's a space to navigate, but it definitely does chip at your confidence in different ways. But it cannot define you either, because it's about realizing how broken the fault lines are in our workplaces as well, and how these nuances definitely make it harder for women in workplaces to really be the way that they would want to be in how they express themselves, or even how we would choose to work. And it's interesting, I mean, even things like work-life balance, you know, we hear it as something that really is promoted quite strongly, and spoken of quite strongly in workplaces. But as soon as you now needing to explain why you need a room to express milk because you've just come back from maternity leave, and maybe no one even thought that this is a consideration. This is the work that we should also be doing, and things that we should be challenging and unpacking. Or if you're needing to leave work early because you now need to attend to the life part of what your day is supposed to look like. We don't need those kind of things really being questioned. So, and I suppose for me, a big one really would be, how do we ensure that our workplaces are more psychologically safe for women? I was reading a report by the World Health Organization, and it was alarming or astounding for me to see that, you know, gender-based inequalities are the reason why women's mental health would either be overtreated or undertreated, or why there is a rise in things like experiences of stress, burnout, depression, and anxiety. So I think there's a lot that we can't necessarily ignore, you know, whether we see underrepresentation of women in workplaces, or in business, or whether we ourselves have opportunities, more voice and more power. From whichever side of it you are sitting, the work for us in IOP really is to speak into these spaces. The picture you see on the screen is one that is from Mahadi or Lobola negotiations in our family. And it's actually weird when you start realizing that you're reaching that adulting stage of life where you are being asked to receive, you know, lobola. And, you know, when I used to think that I'm looking around and everyone else maybe is the adult, I am that person. So that's me actually there at the back. And it's actually so interesting that within Master's culture, women have always been part of these type of negotiations. So in essence, have always been afforded the opportunity to lead, to speak into that space, to empower other women and so forth. But interestingly, it almost seems like it's only when it is suitable, perhaps, that the rest of the world operates in such a way that a leadership opportunity isn't naturally handed over to you without a bit of protest, or without you having to really put up a good business case for it. And it shouldn't be so. So I really hope that these are some of the things that you are thinking as well, in terms of what your role can really look like in industrial psychology, and or even HRM. But quite interestingly, I mean, one of the things that tends to affect women mostly, that's what research is showing, is imposter syndrome, or experiences of being an imposter. And it's not something that's exclusive to women, but I do find it, again, intriguing that women would experience it more. And I think it definitely is one of the things that I've seen myself through my own experiences, how your career well-being can be affected by your view of self or your view of the situation that you find yourself in, and the level of comfort or discomfort that you find in workplaces. So for anyone even embarking on an internship next year, look out for it. Don't allow that to derail you either, because you only have 12 months. But even if you are really wanting to do more in your workspace, definitely is something that is worth us exploring. Really, what does it really mean, and what does it look like? Because it is something that comes from a psychological space, in a sense that it has to do with the self-doubt that creeps in and triggers things like anxiety, worry, overworking, or even avoiding these opportunities to work and to thrive, because you feel like you are either inadequate in that space, or you feel like you don't have enough to give. These are things that tend to be imposed on women sometimes. But just as a person, if you're feeling like, even regardless of the fact that you might have a master's or you might have relevant work experience, but you're not seeing the relevance of your own role or what you can contribute in any given space. And it can lead to a lot of things. In some cases, over preparation, and in other instances, procrastinating and sitting on opportunities, or even allowing opportunities to pass you by, for example, because you think you are not ready. So it really is a readiness challenge that I'm speaking about here. And if I look at my early days of even starting out my career, things like when I was doing my internship, I didn't necessarily have a car at the time. So you can imagine how well I actually ended up knowing the networks of transportation and getting to where I need to be, if that's what was expected of me, from the train to buses to taxis to finishing typing up emails on a notepad on my phone, so that when I get home, I can finish that off and send it to the client who's in a different time zone, for example. But even things like your first presentation or your first big tender, whatever that first looks like for you, it can easily come with these feelings of inadequacy, or wanting to make yourself less noticeable or your achievements less noticeable. And it shouldn't be, because I think all of us really have so much to contribute and so many strengths to bring to the table, as much as there are areas that we all have to develop in. But how much more as a woman, if you now may be faced with gender-based discrimination now in your workplace, and for other people it's things like being overlooked for promotions, or even things like workplace bullying. So these are realities that aren't necessarily part of the onboarding package at any organization necessarily, as much as there'll be policies that speak into these things. But it's more about the lived experience, and how do you then draw a lot out of that without experiencing more stress than you need to, without experiencing more anxiety or even depression than you actually need to. And I think if you really are wondering, where do I fit in, or what really do I have to give, or how much experience is enough, realize that indeed you have the potential to lead already because of who you are. And I love that quote by Mewangari Matai, where she says, African women in general need to know that it's okay for them to be the way they are, and to see the way they are as a strength, and be liberated from fear and from silence. Some of the things that I found helpful, even when I was just exploring, what are strategies to overcome imposter syndrome. And it has to do with recognizing and acknowledging your achievements, and working from that as a place of strength. Whatever you would have achieved up until this space and time, really has a lot to say about your strengths, about where your competencies lie, and where your passion lies as well. I think a lot of the time, people are afraid to color outside of the lines, and for your career to look anything less than a linear, straight progression. And I found that it actually doesn't necessarily work that way. And I think a lot of people as well realize that sometimes too late in life. But in essence, whatever giving your best looks like, acknowledge that. Wherever you are given positive feedback, acknowledge that. Whenever an opportunity does actually come your way, review it, sit with it for a bit, and find ways to not count yourself out. Find what is exhilarating and exciting about that, because that is part of the journey of overcoming, really. And in essence, the more you take on in terms of the things and opportunities actually that you want to take on, not just the next available promotion, the more comfortable you are in choosing which direction your career goes. And that has definitely been true of me. And I mean, even a quotation that Brene Brown has shared. So in essence, you either walk inside your story and own it, or you stand outside your story and hustle for your worthiness. And even looking at the reflections that Lupita Nyong'o shared there, because you would think an award-winning actress like her, surely things like imposter syndrome aren't really a factor. And I mean, just listen to what she says. I go through acute imposter syndrome with every role. I think winning an Oscar may, in fact, have made it worse. Now I've achieved this. What am I going to do next? What do I strive for? Then I remember that I didn't get into acting for the accolades. I got into it for the joy of telling stories. And I think that really is where it is at also with industrial psychology. What is the reason for you having been drawn to this or wanting to grow in this? And, find ways to stay true to that, definitely. I mean, what it has looked like for me, for example, is that I started out in consulting psychology, working for the JVR Africa group, and really working with a variety of clients, which was amazing. And I've always been drawn to either newly created roles or roles that have not existed before. And that's also part of what happened with me moving into higher education, and me starting to see that, listen, I can actually contribute in different ways, and bring a very new dynamic to what I'm doing. So I was actually the first industrial psychologist at the South African College of Applied Psychology, but working, across disciplines. And that has actually been one of the most rewarding things, because it has, one, raised awareness, but also two, about IOP, allowed me to contribute in ways that are meaningful, or ways that I found meaningful. And in the community focused side of it, really was an initiative where, for me, access to resources matters that much in an African context. And it sits somewhere between psychosocial well-being and career mentoring, and working a lot with young people, which is what I do by night type of work, and hoping to do more of. But I found it quite exhilarating actually to say yes to so many things, even during lockdown. Because I think it has freed my mind as well to explore career in different ways. So I'm thinking, even if you are now looking at moving into an internship space, or moving out of a graduate space into something else, what can it really look like? Because for any new role, COVID or not, generally takes about 9 months to settle into a new role. Most internships or graduate programs or learnerships are about 12 months long. So it's a whirlwind of an experience. And in essence, you end up having to onboard yourself through relationship building and connecting with other women and people within the organization, but even outside of that workspace, as a way to fast track your own learning. So set up time with people, and learn, allow yourself to learn, allow yourself to be intrigued more than anything, is what I think really taps into navigating an internship. Because I mean, on the left, you can see the areas that would be expected of you in an IOP internship. This is what you need to be covering within that year that you'd be busy with things. But I think even one of the things I've been coming across is that we're now moving more beyond things like SMART goals, and what are psychometric assessments telling us about careers. And especially, I mean, when people aren't even sold on the usefulness of psychometric assessments as part of career guidance. And I think there's definitely such a rich place for that, in terms of what you can get out of psychometric assessments. But I think ultimately it comes down to what is being referred to as SMURF goals. So still specific, but goals, career goals that are meaningful for you as a person, or meaningful to the people you'd be working with, even in your internship space. Utility, it's about grabbing the opportunities that actually work for you, and not just what is next in front of you. And I think you should really be hearing a meaningful career journey more than anything is what you should be striving for, and realizing that it will look so different for all of us. And be reasonable in what is achievable in whatever career decision you would be making, because it isn't a straight line, and anyone else's experience will inspire you, but your own journey will still look very distinct. And it's very easy to drown and sit with what you are struggling with, not grasping, and feel a little bit stuck. But feedback is honestly so important in wanting to move through your career in a way that really allows you to grow and to learn and to contribute at your very best. And I mean, one of the things that I have found quite helpful is career resilience. And I think all of us have it at various levels and based on the experiences that we have also gone through. But I mean, the pace of work as we are seeing it now, and what we will see more of in terms of, will there still be a demand even for the type of work that IOPs are doing, or a career in IOP and HR? The work pace is exhilarating, but often overwhelming for people. And it requires taking ownership to stay on track and to really grow within any workspace that you choose to be in. And it's a mindset shift as well. People don't work for organizations. You work with an organization. You don't necessarily have a boss. You have a team leader. On an internship, it's not just that, it's your role, contribution, and what you can do there. But I think more than anything, what you can take from this is, don't disqualify yourself from any task or even a learning opportunity. At the very least, observe, try it, become more confident, and then crush it, because you are now doing it that excellently. And I think especially in an internship space, it can feel like the boardroom table is too big or it's too overwhelming. Isn't there a kiddie's table perhaps that I should be sitting at, or being too observational in your approach as well? But find that safe space to share your ideas, whether that's setting up a one-on-one with a supervisor or whoever you're working with, or whether it is reflecting on what you're learning, what are the ideas you can contribute. If you learn something new, go and research it, and question, processes in a way that adds value for everyone who's there, but more than anything for you as a person needing to learn and needing to navigate that space. And I think really in closing, one of the things that I'd really want to encourage everyone on this webinar with is just to be more context sensitive and context appreciative. So what is it from your own context have you learned? What has contributed to who you are? And how can that contribute then to the success of your own career, or the task that you have in front of you? And then the context sensitivity aspect of it is realize how the world of work is changing. Realize what the real challenges are in workplaces, and lean into that, because that is really where our biggest contribution is, in being able to bring our skills, bring ourselves every day into the relationships that we into the work opportunity spaces that we create or we see opening up, and allow yourself to be intrigued and inspired more than anything, because being a woman in IOP, there's definitely a lot that you can do and contribute, but it shouldn't be something that you see as a career limiting move or as a career limiting position to be in more than anything. So I know that even from what we will hear from Nozipo, like how do you even straddle between that space of this is IOP today, what does it look like post pandemic, what does it look like in the future? I'm definitely excited to hear from her, and I'm really glad definitely that I could join you today, at least in sharing a little bit of my insight of how broader a career in industrial psychology can be, even without the professional registration of psychologists. So that is it really from me, Marissa.
Thank you very much, Ashley. I think you touched on a lot of topics that might seem a little bit new in terms of concepts like imposter syndrome, for example. And that's definitely a reality that people are faced with, not only just women, men as well. And I think it's very important that we be human about this and that we really support each other. And I think even in leadership, and that majority of leaders do experience imposter syndrome because it's actually a very lonely zone on top. But if we realize that they are also just humans, leaders, we should be more compassionate, definitely, with our leaders. And I think I really liked the mindset shift to say, I'm not working for, but I'm working with this company. And I think that mind shift really makes a huge difference in terms of where you are at within the company that you are working. And I really like this being context sensitive as well. And also being appreciative of the differences in terms of context. And I think that's a wonderful contribution. And I think we really need to rethink this and shift our mindsets in terms of that. So, Ashley, thank you so much for sharing your journey and also for sharing those concepts that we sometimes miss, but it's realistic. It really is within the context that we are working within. So, thank you very much. Nusipu, you are welcome to share your PowerPoint with us. We are very, very curious to hear what you are going to share with us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marissa. And thank you, Ashley. I mean, that was a really helpful conversation about imposter syndrome and just to normalize it. Because half of the time, I think we don't recognize it in ourselves. And I think to just recognize it and then to start putting in place strategies to overcome it is wonderful. So thank you for sharing that. I found that helpful. And I think it allows me to be more conscious of it when it happens. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. And before I kick off, I just want to say good afternoon to the students on the call. And I'm also really excited to be here. So thank you for the opportunity. And in my discussion, I'm going to look at two things. So I'm going to share my own advice that I've experienced and learned through my own career as well. Just some tips and practices that we can put in place in the moment that help us show up as the best version of ourselves. And then I'm going to talk about what the impact of COVID-19 has been on industrial psychology, and then what the opportunities and challenges are for us as practitioners, and the spaces that we need to be thinking about, rethinking, supporting and guiding the businesses and the organizations that we work with as we journey through this period. So I always think it's a nice starting point to start with a definition when we talk about this idea of leading ourselves, to give us a framework to work with and to just put it into context. And something that I find useful for myself is to have a definition. So a definition that I think is great is that self-leadership is having a developed sense of who you are, what you can do, where you are going, coupled with the ability to manage your communication, emotions, and behaviors on the way to getting there. So that's a definition by Andrew Bryant. And what I like about it is that it looks at self-leadership as having two components. The first is that if we want to be people who are leading ourselves and constantly leading ourselves, there's internal work that needs to be taking place. We need to be watching our self-talk. We need to be in tune with how we're feeling about things, and we need to be interrogating our internal world. And then when we do that more and more, and we do it consciously, it inevitably shows itself in the way that we interact, in the way that we manage our emotion, in the way that we show up confidently and take up space. And I really liked what Dr. Sane said up front, and the quote by Zozibini, because for me that was such an important lesson, and such an important lesson for people across groups, young people, African people, women, to say we need to believe that we have a right to take up space, and that our thoughts and opinions and our experiences matter, and to be consciously doing this, because when we do it, we give room and we give space for others to do it. So I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about how we can authentically shift into a space where we take up space, where we show up as ourselves, and how that really starts with us looking at the things we tell ourselves, at the thoughts that we have about ourselves, and how we make sure that those are healthy and are in our best interest. So in terms of leading yourself, then I've divided it into three components. And the first one is about knowing yourself. So I think there is an appreciation of everybody on the call about the power of self-awareness, that we understand that we need to know our personality, we need to have a sense of our preferences. Am I an introvert? Am I an extrovert? Do I enjoy concepts or abstract theories, or am I drawn to detail and concrete information? And I think that's the start of it, and we must continue to do that work, which can come from personality assessments, from reflecting, journaling, seeing ourselves in the moment, and then feedback from peers. But what I really want to talk about in knowing yourself is the first idea from Brené Brown that she gives us, which is that we need to believe in this concept. And I've seen it for myself, and it's something that I've over time had to keep reminding myself, the idea of worth before worthiness. And Ashley sort of touched on it a bit, but it's this idea that as we shift into the world of work, and you go from being a master's student to being a junior person to being the youngest person in the room, that we believe in our worth at a human level, not because we have a particular title or because we have a particular tenure, but that we are worthy because we are human. And often we ascribe our worthiness to participate, to contribute, to ask questions, to our tenure, to a job title. And I really want to encourage everybody to almost say it to yourself as a mantra, if you would like, to go into a meeting, to go into any scenario and remind yourself, I'm worth being here. I've earned my right to be here. Because when you do that and you really believe that, it frees you to think and to contribute and to not sit in a state of anxiety or to be too observational and quiet. And so if there's one thing that's really helped me, and the journey continues. So I think I'm a young person, but I've worked for about 10 years and I struggle with this. So I will go into boardrooms, I will go into interactions where I am the youngest person and I am the most junior person, and immediately you know, the self-talk kicks in that says, should I be here? Do I have anything to contribute? And if we can hold to this principle of worth before worthiness, it shifts us out of fear and anxiety and into a state of being present, being open, and then being able to contribute because you're in a state of learning versus being in a state of fear. So that's the first concept for me that helps to just regulate that internal world. It's to regulate the self-talk. And when we speak to ourselves, we speak to ourselves in a positive way. And we keep reminding ourselves that we are worthy and deserve to be in any space that we find ourselves in. The second piece of advice that I have is something that I learned through experience. And it's this idea of giving ourselves permission to reinvent ourselves. So when I left university, I'm also a Durbanite, by the way. left Durban, had been living at home, moved to Johannesburg to start my internship at a management consulting company, and moved with 2 of my peers. And so you have 3 people who are interns who have studied together for 5 years. And by the time you get to honors and masters, you know each other, you're friendly, you share research, you share references, you share anxiety about your thesis. And so there's this sense of, I know my identity and I know their identity, and this is my definition of myself at this point. And you're probably sitting there and may find yourself going into a particular internship with 1 or 2 of your peers or people who are in your peer group. And when you walk into the world of work, it's to also accept that you will discover different layers of yourself, and that sometimes those layers are uncomfortable. And I found we were all struggling with that. So we move from being not colleagues, from being peers, from being people who shared resources, to being seen as individuals who have to contribute individually, who have to have a voice individually. And I found myself struggling a little bit with that guilt, because I recognize this is work and I'm exploring this part of myself, but I feel a bit guilty that people are at different points or are showing up in different ways. And it's to be okay and give yourself permission to reinvent yourself, and also reinvent yourself and allow the best parts of yourself to come through. So the second part of knowing yourself is to say that what I know myself as at this point is not going to be who I am completely next year and the following year. And I will discover layers of myself, and I need to embrace those layers of myself. And sometimes it can cause discomfort in yourself, and in your peers, but it's to allow that if it's for your growth and your development, and it allows you to show up in the best version of yourself. I think even small things in those first couple of years, you struggle to take ownership of your work, and you want to kind of say, we all did this and everybody equally contributed, because there's this attachment to the old part of yourself and that definition of yourself. And I struggled with that for a bit until I went, this part of myself is also who I am. And how do I incorporate that into myself versus saying, am I being fake? Is this, am I doing this to get ahead? What is this about? And it's to say, be open to finding new things in yourself that you didn't know were there, to be open to learn from the environment around you, and to be open to bring your strengths into the room at every point. So 1, worth before worthiness. You will go into work. You will find yourself being the youngest person. You will find yourself being the most junior person, and there will be jokes, but it's to recognize that you belong in every room, in every space, in every interaction that you find yourself in, and then to free yourself to think and to contribute. And then the second is to allow yourself to reinvent yourself. So if you go in on your own, I think it's a little bit easier. If you go in with a peer group, it's to allow that you will learn things about yourself and you incorporate those things into your identity. And then you will learn things about your peers, and to allow them as well to grow and develop. Then the second part, or the second practice that I found helpful in my ability to lead myself, is understanding that I'm a whole person, that ultimately we are not our work, we are not our internships, we are not promotions, we are not job titles. You are a whole person who is valuable to yourself, valuable to your loved ones, valuable to your family, and that we have a responsibility to look after ourselves. And so the 3 parts that I think are very important to start building in as habits now is to look after your mental wellness, and to look after your emotional wellness, and then creating boundaries. And I'm going to talk about creating boundaries because I think it's an important conversation for young people, and maybe particularly Black people who will go into their first jobs and their first internships, and maybe one of the first few, or maybe a minority in your families. And how do you have those conversations about expectations, particularly around finances? But just in terms of looking after yourself, I think very importantly, when you are young and you're healthy, you can continue and get off on doing very little. But I think it's very important, and it becomes an edge for you to build in habits that look after your diet, that look after how you exercise, because it builds your resilience. And I think this, interestingly enough, during this period has become such a conversation in the organization that I work in, to really say what strategies and practices are people putting in place to look after themselves. Because when we're exhausted and when we're working longer hours because there are less people working, particularly frontline staff, how do we make sure that we can continue without burning out, and how do we combat stress? And it's all about taking preventative measures. So it may not be something that comes naturally to you, but I want to encourage you now as a student to really start looking at 3 practical things that you are in control of, and that's really your eating, your movement, and your rest, which is sleep. So look at your diet and find healthy things to incorporate into your diet, because when we eat the right food, it gives us energy, it gives us mental clarity, because you will work harder. Depending on where you go, you're going to have to work longer, work harder, and just think. So you want to also do things for yourself in your life that help you be the best version of yourself, and at work for your families. Then secondly, mental resilience. So I during this period, I've been challenged to really start putting in place things that help me stay in a mentally healthy state. And whatever that looks like for you, find the thing that works for you. Whether that's journaling, where you sit down at the end of the day and you kind of go through recognizing your emotions, unpacking your emotions, and accepting your emotional state. I think that's an important thing to do, especially during this period, but also as you go into change, as you go into a new environment, to think about how do you regulate your emotion, accept your emotion, and work with your emotions so that your emotions don't overwhelm you or control you. um, what exercise do you have in place? You can do yoga, you can do running, whatever that is. But as basic as it sounds, I think it's so important that young people think of strategies to renew yourself and build mental and physical vitality. And then the third, about looking after yourself, is creating boundaries. And for me, creating boundaries is made up of 2 things. The first is that there are conversations that need to be had. And then the second is to identify allies and advocates in your life that can help you have those conversations that need to be had. So I want to talk about the boundary that needs to be created first with your family and your loved ones, and then we'll go into work. And I am speaking specifically, I think, to the Black experience here, or to the African experience, but to anybody else as well that may identify with this. But it's really about saying you're going to go from student to someone who is employed, who's working um, at home. And I think it's important for you that if at this point you haven't thought about it, to think deeply about what expectation you you can meet to support your family, to support your loved ones, and what you can't. Because I think the one thing that I wish I could have done differently at the beginning is to really think about how do you support your family, but then also set yourself up for long-term financial success, where you are able to sustain yourself and sustain your family, and not be in a lot of debt. Because I think that's a reality that many young people who are one of the first few people to study find themselves in. So I want you to think about that and think about those conversations that you need to have. And then also find an ally and advocate in your family, because often there are a few people around you who understand work, who understand careers, who understand that an internship, is not going to bring you the big bucks just yet. And to have that person advocate for you and on your behalf to family members. So that boundary is an important boundary to create, for your wellness, and so that there are clear expectations as well, in your family about what you can and can't do, and that you don't become over indebted as somebody who's starting their career and working their way through their career. The second boundary is in your workspace. And again, it's a conversation, a courageous one that needs to be had. And it's also about finding an ally and an advocate. So the boundary there, as an industrial psychology master's student going into corporate, there are some wonderful spaces and wonderful organizations that understand what industrial psychologists do and are open to giving you a great internship experience. And then some of you may walk into an organization where you need to have an alignment conversation where people become clear about what the purpose of the internship is, what is the scope of your internship. And of course, that doesn't mean don't pick up your hand. In fact, pick up your hand for everything that you can, but do not get bogged down into doing just the donkey work or just the admin and not getting value and getting the value that you need as an industrial psychology intern. So that conversation that needs to happen is when you go in with your supervisor and any team leader that you may be working in and in their space to align about expectations, about the scope of your work, and then to reinforce that. And if that and I think one thing that is helpful is, again, to find someone who will advocate for that, because there will be times where people need help and need resources and may pull you into things that have got nothing to do with you, which take up a lot of your time. And that was my experience, which is why I'm saying it and I'm really emphasizing it, because what helped me in my internship was to have my supervisor as a strong advocate for the scope of the industrial psychology internship. I went on a project and it was supposed to be change management, and it was change management exposure, which I was really excited about. And after 3 weeks, I found myself listening to recorded voice messages, taking down voice messages because the person that I was reporting to was too busy to listen to her own voice messages. So there are some horror stories. And what helped me out of that situation was to give that feedback to my supervisor, who then spoke up and advocated and kind of made sure that we recontract about the scope of work. So you may or may not find yourself in positions like that, but it's very important to, one, have a conversation up front with your supervisor and with the team leader that you may work with, and then continue to check in and align and recontract so that the boundary is there, and that when you leave your internship, you've gotten the most value out of that experience and you've learned and grown. So that's about looking after yourself. And then the last practice or just piece of advice I'd like to give is to challenge yourself. So as you go into the next phase of your life and you shift from student to intern to career, it's to adopt a growth mindset. And the idea of a growth mindset is that there are two mindsets that govern our lives and the way we live. We can either have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And a fixed mindset is this idea that we have innate talents. What I can do well now is fixed, and I cannot practice something until I get it right. And it's just this idea that if I'm good at maths or I'm good at psychology, that's the complete version of me, and I won't venture out and try different things or practice until I get good at something. And then a growth mindset is the opposite of that. It's the openness to learning. It's the openness to saying, I'm going to go into a space where I know theory about industrial psychology. I've worked very hard to get where I am, and that's great. And so I do add value, but I need to open myself up to add additional knowledge, additional experiences, insight to what I already know. And it may include practicing something until I get it to the level that I need it to. And it may include understanding that I am probably going to have setbacks that I didn't anticipate, and I'm probably going to have failures that I didn't anticipate. But the way I respond to that is to say, this is about learning, and it's to walk in with a hat and a mindset and an attitude that says everything that you're going to experience and that you are experiencing in your life is therefore your highest learning. And then the second one is such an obvious one, but I think it's very important to practice self-discipline also because I had to learn that. And practicing self-discipline, again, is this transition from university where you are mostly self-regulating. You understand you have your thesis and you attend lectures a few days in the week, and the rest of the time you manage your time and you manage your time toward your deliverable and what you have to do. And shifting into a space where work is a little more regulated than university. If there's one thing I look back on, and I said it over and over again in my first year of working, is just I miss the free time. I miss being able to work in the hours that I choose to work, and then being able to do other things like go to the beach and connect with my friends. And so work is regulated. There's an expectation that you're going to work from Monday to Friday, that you're going to work during some core hours, depending on how flexible your organization is. And it's to understand also that you are going to go in and there are going to be things that you love and you're passionate about and you give your all and you are willing to pull all-nighters and really give your heart and soul into pieces of work. And then there are areas where you are going to get given a piece of work that you dislike, that you that that doesn't inspire you, but that with every piece of work that you get given, you need to practice self-discipline. And what I find helpful about thinking about that and work is that ultimately, at this point in your career and for the first few years in your life, you are building your personal brand. And so, with everything that you do, you're communicating to your peers, you're communicating to your team leaders, you're communicating to the environment. This is who I am. This is the person you can trust. This is me being reliable. And so, see it in that light. Kind of go in and you're building your brand and you're building your trust currency. And then the last one, which I'm particularly passionate about because this has been a new project of mine that I've really sunk my teeth into this year, is about exploring and pursuing additional passions. So again, we are whole people. We are not just industrial psychologists, and we don't just have a passion for industrial psychology. And we exist in a system. We exist in communities. We exist in a society. We exist in a South Africa. And I think it's about asking yourself what you enjoy, what people come to you for, and where you can use more of that outside of work. So it's to look around in your community and to see where the need is. There's such fantastic things that we can offer as industrial psychologists and that we can keep adding to our toolkit. Things like emotional intelligence, personal resilience, communication, all of those things. And I think I want to encourage you to find organizations, find charities to do those things for and do them for free, because I think in your giving back you grow and you get something from that, and we contribute to the communities that we live in, who may never have access to what we have access to as industrial psychologists and practitioners. So I want to encourage you to look around in your communities, look around in the spaces that you are in, find one charity to give some of your time, share some of your expertise with, because a lot of what sits in our toolkit is a life skill. I'm particularly passionate about emotional intelligence, and it is a life skill. And I think that where we can find those opportunities to facilitate those discussions with children, with adults in our communities. So that's the first. And then the second is, I think young people, particularly at this point, need to really think about side hustles and create side hustles. I think the COVID pandemic has had a significant impact on businesses and organizations, and I'm going to talk about that next. But it has had currently and will also have an impact on our economy. And I think that if we also think about ourselves as citizens of this country and as having a role to play in the well-being and the state of our country, that when we create side hustles and when we do things that we have a passion for that are outside of corporate spaces, we are contributing to the greater good. So I want to really encourage you to challenge yourself to start up a side hustle. Find something that you do in you, and it isn't something that you are already doing. So if you are into photography, or you are a tutor and you are tutoring students right now who are in second or first year, create that as a side hustle, and don't just have one income stream, don't have one passion. Allow yourself to pursue other passions, but also start practicing creating additional revenue, additional income for yourself, because I think when you do that, you're contributing to the greater good and contributing to the good of South Africa. So those are my three tips, my piece of advice that I've learned through my early experiences and my experiences now. I mean, I think there are many things that I constantly have to keep reminding myself, particularly worth before worthiness, and that I give myself permission to reinvent myself. And as I experience life and as I go into different roles and experience different challenges and opportunities, I give myself permission again to learn different parts of myself so that I can show up as the best part of myself. Right. So the next part of my presentation is going to be answering the question of what is the role of industrial psychology post the pandemic, and then also what are the opportunities and challenges for industrial psychology. And then my immediate answer when I saw that question was that I think as industrial and organizational psychologists, we can help shape the post-pandemic workplace. And again, there are so many avenues and areas that we can look at as an industrial psychologist, but just four that come to mind for me are around how we assess for talent, and we need to rethink, relook at that. I think that we're going to see because of where the economy is going, a talent-rich environment. So there are going to be lots of skilled people, lots of amazing talent that is in the market. How do we assess people differently if we do need to, so that we get the best people coming into our organizations? Then the second is about leadership, and I'm going to talk about that, but it's really about how we think about leadership and what leadership we need for now and for the future. What do we take about what we know of leaders, leadership styles and capabilities, and what do we need to let go of, and what do we need to add to our understanding of leadership? The third area that I think that industrial psychologists can help to shape the conversation around and how businesses think about is personal and change resilience. So it is about saying, how do we build that resilience in the people that work in the organizations that we work with to meet change, to overcome adversity, to understand that this has been traumatic now and this may not be the last traumatic event, but how do we start building capability and a muscle in ourselves to meet challenge, to meet adversity and bounce back and grow from that adversity. And then the last one is for me about saying there is an opportunity to look at research, powerful people insights and questions that we weren't asking, and maybe we probably definitely don't have the answers to, but we need to be asking those questions and questions that we weren't asking previously. And so I think the fourth area is that industrial psychologists can drive the research and the thinking into powerful people insights that give us some window into understanding what drivers are of engagement. What does it look like to team effectively post-COVID? What does it look like to create psychologically safe spaces post-COVID? And so I really think that we have an opportunity as behavioral scientists to one, understand that we don't know all the answers, but to hold the space for the organizations that we work with. And we allow them to experience this uncertainty and this disruption, and we reflect back. We reflect back and we start asking questions that shift us into new interventions and into new cultures and leadership practices. So I've called our role sense making, which is what I think we are here to do. We're here to help businesses and organizations at this point make sense of what's going on, and then to start reimagining what could be. And the first area that I think that we as industrial psychologists have a role to play in and need to guide that conversation is the conversation about virtual leadership and management. And I think the important thing here is that we need to shift into a space where we're getting leaders, or we're getting them to shift into a space where they are functioning as leader, as coach. So many of our leaders have gotten to where they are because of deep expertise, technical knowledge, the right tenure. So they have been the people who are the gatekeepers, who are the final eyes on anything and have the answers for their teams. And I think this period has challenged them because it has been uncomfortable. They may not have had all of the answers. And in my experiences with leaders, it's been very interesting to see that there have been people who've been in the organization for years and years and years. And when you have a conversation with them and you say, how's your team doing? And they say, I don't know. And this feels uncomfortable to me, because one or two people will come to me and give and say, you know, what's the latest information on this, or what should we be doing? What is the implication on our targets and our goals? And these leaders don't have the answer. And they've stated that this is uncomfortable. And as an industrial psychologist working with these leaders, it's just to get them to understand and create that awareness that says, it's good that this is uncomfortable, because it gives us room to talk about what it means to function as a leader who coaches for performance versus being a leader who tells and instructs and who can see the way. Because we've been talking about the VUCA world, we've been talking about disruptive change, but this has been forced on us. And so finally, it's a lived experience. And so I think there's a really great opportunity for us to say, guys, no one foresaw this. This is disruptive, it's unprecedented, and this is likely to be a status quo for time going forward. So then how do we lead most effectively during this period? And I think, in my view, the answer is that we get them to coach by asking the right questions of their people, by exploring solutions versus having the answer with their people, and then by coming to a decision that is incorporating the knowledge and the wisdom that sits in their team. So in terms of leadership, I think there's a great opportunity for us to start realizing the aspirational leadership that many organizations have had, because this pandemic has created fertile ground for leaders to really start saying, I don't know, so what do I need to start doing differently? And when they ask those questions, for us to guide and to say, what does it look like to coach then? How do you get the best out of your people by coaching? And importantly, what's that done? Where we have started doing it in the business is that people, first of all, have felt more psychologically safe. So it's a funny thing, but it's sort of equalized the playing field in teams and created room for more voices to speak up without this fear that I'm saying the wrong thing, or I don't know the right answer and I'm not the expert in the room. And it's created this equal playing field and created a safer space for diverse views. So I think it's great. And I think we need to also let leaders and teams be aware that in a way that was unplanned, we are creating safer spaces because we have to, and because leaders are shifting into a coaching role, we're hearing more voices. And I think it's for us to push this advantage and to press this gap that is there, where leaders are recognizing that they need to shift and do something differently if they're going to get the best out of their people. The second one is to help organizations that we work with look at the emergent changes in work practices. And emergent because I think that previously the idea of working from home was definitely something that, you know, an organization can decide to do or not do, but also it was suited to my preferences, you know, so I want to work from home because it allows me to be flexible and drop kids and then come in and work. And working from home now has been forced on us. So it's been forced, and I'm interested to see, you know, post COVID and post the need for everybody to be at home, will this remain, you know, or will we go back to our offices? So it's also to start thinking about, we have responded and we've been able to work remotely, but is this the norm? And should we not be looking at what productivity has happened during this period, what the engagement levels have been like, collaboration between teams and all of that, and normalize work from home? Because I think there's a part of me that's fearful that we will lose the gains that have been made by COVID if we don't get the business to recognize what those gains have been at this point for people working from home. So I think you can tell that I'm a strong advocate for working from home. So we need to interrogate the work practices that have emerged. So what does team collaboration look like? What does team cohesion look like? What does it mean to lead remotely? And I think the one encouraging thing that I've seen in my experience during this period and working with teams is that often, and I started off in management consulting as well, and I think those environments stress delivery and focusing on deliverables, focusing on results. And I've seen less of that and in a corporate space, and a focus on presenteeism and a focus on I can see you're working and kind of just being busy. And I think now corporates and leaders have been forced to say what are our goals and our results. And so again, I think it's also to be able to say, are you having coaching conversations? What are your performance conversations like, so that you can measure results? And it may seem obvious, but I don't think that that was where most corporates were, which was really about saying, are we measuring results or are we measuring visibility? And now I think there is a shift toward measuring results and measuring deliverables, which is, I think, again, a good advancement. And again, it's for us to help our businesses interrogate this. So what gains have we made during this period in our work practices? How do they support us realizing business objectives, business strategy, and how are they getting the best out of our people? And then what should we be letting go of and rethinking? And then the third thing about our changes in our work practices is that I think we as psychologists need to remain flexible. So we are in, I think, a bit more clarity now than when we were and when we started in March. And so we have a few more answers now, and we have been able to put in place digital interventions to help with team effectiveness and leadership conversations. But I think we still need to remain flexible about what else we need to be thinking about. And I am seeing an area, which is that the opportunity is also for us to help business leaders and coach to redesign work and job practices, but redesign in collaboration with staff. I think there's definitely a shift to, we need to be having conversations with the people that are doing the work, that have an understanding of their home life and their boundaries that they need to put in place and their deliverables. Now that I'm measuring results and delivery, because I've been forced to, how do I make sure that this job is set up to get the best out of this person and to maximize value to the business? And so I think there are going to be areas that we are going to have to support the business and guide and think through. And it's going to be around org redesign, job redesign. And then I think a challenge that we are probably going to experience is working with an environment and an economy where we are likely to see retrenchments and restructures that negatively impact people directly, and also people whose families are impacted. And then how do we help those people build resilience as that change happens? I think that organizations are definitely going to be asking themselves, what do we need? What do we need that is new, that is different, that is responsive to where we find ourselves? And I think that there is going to be an impact on people. And then how do we help people bounce back? And this is something that I've really found difficult to facilitate virtually, and we've been running these change resilience sessions in the business, and the feedback from people is that the pandemic has impacted their financial well-being. It has impacted their families. You have spouses that are not working, you have spouses that are on half a salary, and how do we work with the person who is in that stress, who is fearful of the security of their own job, and how do we lead empathetically, design empathetically, but design with the future in mind? And I think that's the role of an industrial psychologist as well. I think that HR practitioner or HR looks after people and cares about the business, but I think our role as industrial psychologists is to also support that conversation and lead that conversation and make sure that the right thinking about people happens, and to think holistically. So not just move blocks around, but to think about what else can exist, what are the new ways of work that we need to be thinking about, because sometimes we can leave it as an HR practice, but I think that the expertise of an industrial psychologist are important, because we need to be thinking about our strategy. We need to be thinking about how does our culture and our behaviors and things that we do help us realize that strategy, and then we need to move the pieces around. And so I think industrial psychology needs to partner with HR in that conversation. And then the third area that I think we need to support businesses and help them make sense of is this idea of personal resilience and really connecting with our people to help them bounce back. And I've put down a definition of resilience because I think it's important to just understand what we mean when we talk about resilience. And it's not this like, I'm going to, soldier on, but it's the process of adapting well in the face of adversity. And it's not just about bouncing back, but it can lead to profound personal growth. And I think the one practice that I think has been important for us as industrial psychologists to do is to hold up the mirror for leaders and to let them know that at this point, this is a dynamic period that we find ourselves in. This is a period where people are experiencing heightened emotion and heightened stress, and we need to build and help them bounce back and adapt well, because then we risk people experiencing post-traumatic stress because of the challenges and the unique challenges that they face in their own life. And what we want to do is shift them into a space where they're experiencing post-traumatic growth. Okay, so it's been stressful and it's been hard, but I've grown from this. And we're having those conversations. And it's so interesting to see that when leaders start to model vulnerability and start to accept that I don't know is their answer, that it builds connection and it builds trust because we're leading transparently. And these conversations have been leader-led and have been happening, and I think we need to do more of those, because again, I think what we're doing is informing and shifting a culture and shifting cultures into a space where people are living the cultures that they've mostly aspired to. And then the last one is that we have powerful people insights. So it's about saying that we need to look at research and we need to start really thinking about what information are we getting that helps us reimagine organizations, the ways that we work, and the culture and leadership that we aspire to. So as a last thought for everybody on the line, I think that during this period, there have been lots of learnings. There have been lots of areas, leader conversations, personal and change resilience, and how we assess for talent that we can look at. But I think the one thought that we can think about and mindset that we can think about as industrial psychologists that will help us remain relevant and be able to navigate the future is the idea that we need to embrace exponential living. As young people, as young industrial psychologists as well, we need to embrace exponential living. And what that means is that I and you have to let go of this idea that our lives are going to be linear and sequential, that we're going to walk out of varsity, we're going to get into a job, we're going to climb the corporate ladder, we're going to find our spouse, and then we're going to die. And it's not going to be like that. And I think exponential living is about saying we need to think about life as dynamic, and we need to almost shift our to-do list into a to-be list. So what do I want to be? How do I want to live? What human being do I want to be for the loved ones in my life, for my community and for South Africa? And then work my way back. And once I have that why and my to be, then it informs my choices, that it informs my to-do, it informs which organizations I choose to work with and which organizations I don't choose to work with. It informs the type of work that I choose to take on. It informs how I show up because I've defined how I want to be. And so for me, a decade ago, I made a decision that I want to be an individual who creates psychologically safe spaces for different people, for diverse groups of people. And that's informed everything. It's informed how I show up in every single engagement. And I want to encourage you to do that. So as an action, go ahead and create a to-be list. What is your to-be list? What does that look like? What behaviors does that look like? And I think it will help you think about anything that you have to think about as you go forward and the options that will present themselves to you. So I'm going to hand over to Marissa and thank you for listening. I hope it's been valuable.
Thank you so much, Nasipu. I really like this idea of exponential living. that your to-be list, who do you want to be for yourself, for your community, for your people close to you, family, friends, as well as society, actually creating a vision board for yourself and really working towards that idealistic person that you have for yourself. And I think that's wonderful to actually also and inspiring to have that as part of the who you are, the person that you want to be, and how you lead yourself as well. I'm going to open up the floor now for questions. So if there's any questions, you're welcome to raise your hand and then we can address those questions. So anybody wanting to ask questions on the YouTube channel, you are more than welcome also to type your question. Right, so currently it seems that there are no questions. So we are running out of time. Dr. Sanay, I'm going to ask you final words of encouragement and inspiration for our future leaders within the IOP field. What would you say is your last words of inspiration?
I think today's discussion has been very interesting. I mean, I've actually taken a lot from it. I think it's been interesting how my story, what Ashley has said, and Nosipho has really. And what I would take away is to really own your own capabilities and step into your power, to keep a growth mindset and be open to learning and feedback and to continuously improve yourself. And then I think what was actually really resonated with me with what Nosipho said is this notion around really taking care of yourself. I think as we build our careers and our leadership capability, we can be a bit hard on ourselves, and to also to remain focused on what you want, but to be kind on yourself and take care of yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sanay. Nosipho, any last words of inspiration and encouragement for our future leaders, IOP leaders out there?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Marissa. I think for me, what really resonated and stuck was what Dr. Sanay said, which was don't be afraid to be the first. And I think there's a lot of fear about being the first and then being hard on yourself and wanting to be perfect in everything. And it's to go in and own that space and to not be afraid to be the first. That really stuck with me. So thank you for sharing that, because I think it is really about taking up space and shifting from fear into our best self. So thank you. And thank you, Sanay. That's it from me.
Great. Thank you so much, Nosipho. Dr. Sanay and Ashley already had to leave us, but thank you so much for sharing so much insights and your journey. And I think it's so important that one needs to start with yourself first and creating awareness and who do you want to become. And that will definitely have a ripple effect into your relationships with people, with work colleagues, with people within your community, as well as people within the society. So from my side, thank you so much for sharing your experience, your journey. And I think our future IOPs learned a lot with this session today. With that said, thank you so much for joining us on this platform this afternoon. And just a final word is to please, if you are interested in becoming a CYOPSA member, you are more than welcome to contact CYOPSA to become a member. And also, please remember, we are having our very first virtual conference this year from 1 to 3 December. And you as a student will be able to actually tune in from anywhere in the country and the world if you're interested to attend sessions. And I think it's going to be very inspirational as well. And our theme is leading through innovation, navigating the new world of work. So please remember, registrations are open for this, and join us. We're looking forward to seeing you at our virtual conference as well. So thank you so much, everybody. Nosipho, Dr. Sanay, as well as Ashley. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.